Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, and fellow observers of the world, thank you for being here today. It is a pleasure to speak to you, not just as participants in the financial world, but as people who live inside it, who feel its movements, its tensions, and sometimes its contradictions. Today, I would like to share a way of looking at finance and markets that goes beyond charts, beyond balance sheets, and even beyond money itself. When people speak about financial markets, they often describe them as machines. Efficient, logical, predictable when properly understood. But my experience has led me to a very different conclusion. Markets are not machines. They are closer to living organisms, shaped by human belief, fear, confidence, and misunderstanding. To understand them, one must first accept a simple but uncomfortable truth. Markets are deeply imperfect, because humans are deeply imperfect. This idea sits at the center of how I see finance. Traditional economic theory assumes that market participants act rationally, that prices reflect reality, and that errors cancel each other out. But in practice, this is not what happens. Participants operate based on incomplete information, biased interpretations, and emotional responses. And these distortions do not disappear. They accumulate. They feed on themselves. They reshape reality. This is where perception and reality begin to interact in dangerous and fascinating ways. In financial markets, people do not merely observe reality. Their beliefs influence their actions, and their actions influence outcomes. Those outcomes then reinforce or challenge the original beliefs. This circular relationship is what I have called reflexivity. It is not a side effect of markets. It is the engine. Consider a simple example. If investors believe that a company is strong, they buy its stock. As the price rises, the company gains easier access to capital, improves its image, and may actually become stronger. The belief helps create the reality it initially only imagined. But the reverse is also true. When confidence breaks, decline feeds on itself. This dynamic explains why markets move not only in response to facts, but often in anticipation of them, exaggeration of them, or complete misinterpretation of them. Now, this brings us to risk. Risk is often defined as volatility, as numbers fluctuating on a screen. But true risk is not volatility. True risk is misunderstanding. It is the danger of believing that you understand more than you actually do. One of the most important lessons I have learned is this: the more confident the market feels, the more fragile it often becomes. Periods of apparent stability are frequently the moments when hidden imbalances grow quietly beneath the surface. And when those imbalances finally surface, they do so violently. Financial history is not a straight line of progress. It is a series of booms and busts, driven by waves of overconfidence and fear. Every crisis is different in its details, but remarkably similar in its psychology. People convince themselves that this time is different, that old rules no longer apply, that risk has been eliminated. It never has been. This is why humility is not just a moral virtue in finance. It is a strategic necessity. One must constantly question one's own assumptions. One must assume the possibility of being wrong, even when success suggests otherwise. In fact, I would argue that recognizing your own fallibility is the beginning of wisdom in markets. This perspective also changes how we think about speculation. Speculation is often portrayed as reckless or immoral, but speculation itself is not the enemy. Blind speculation is. Thoughtful speculation, grounded in an understanding of market psychology and structural weakness, can serve as a form of diagnosis. It reveals where systems are stretched, where beliefs have detached from reality. However, when speculation becomes widespread and uncritical, it transforms from insight into instability. This leads us to regulation. Markets do not regulate themselves. Left entirely to their own devices, they tend toward excess. This is not because participants are evil, but because incentives reward short-term success and punish caution. Regulation, when intelligently designed, is not an obstacle to markets. It is a stabilizing force that protects the system from its own blind spots. The goal of regulation should not be to eliminate risk, which is impossible, but to prevent the accumulation of systemic risk that threatens the broader society. Because finance does not exist in isolation, markets shape politics. They shape inequality. They influence how resources are distributed and how power is exercised. When financial systems fail, they do not fail quietly. They leave unemployment, social tension, and lost trust in their wake. The cost is not paid by spreadsheets. It is paid by people. For this reason, I have always believed that financial success carries a responsibility. Not a responsibility born of guilt, but of awareness. If one benefits from an open society and its institutions, one should contribute to their preservation. An open society depends on transparency, on accountability, and on the willingness to accept uncertainty. Financial markets, at their best, can support these values. At their worst, they undermine them. We must also address the role of narratives. Markets move not only on data, but on stories. Stories about growth, innovation, decline, or rescue. These narratives simplify complex realities and make them emotionally accessible, but they also distort. When a single narrative dominates, alternative perspectives are ignored, and danger increases. A healthy market ecosystem requires competing narratives, disagreement, and skepticism. Consensus is comforting, but it is rarely safe. Now, let me speak directly to those who participate actively in markets. Traders, investors, analysts. Your task is not to predict the future with certainty. That is impossible. Your task is to recognize when expectations have drifted too far from reality, and when reality itself is being reshaped by those expectations. You are not playing against the market. You are playing inside it. Success does not come from being right all the time. It comes from understanding when you are wrong, quickly and honestly. Losses are not failures. They are information. Ignoring them is the real failure. This mindset also applies beyond finance. We live in a world of accelerating change, where feedback loops exist everywhere. Social media, politics, technology, and markets all amplify belief and reaction. Reflexivity has escaped the trading floor and entered daily life. Understanding this can help us navigate not only markets, but society itself. If there is one lesson I would leave you with, it is this: certainty is seductive, but it is also dangerous. Progress depends not on absolute answers, but on the constant revision of our understanding. In finance, as in life, the willingness to doubt oneself is not weakness. It is strength. Another dimension of financial markets that deserves attention is time. Markets are obsessed with the short term. Quarterly earnings, daily price movements, even minute-by-minute fluctuations dominate decision-making. But value, stability, and real economic impact unfold over much longer horizons. This mismatch between market time and real-world time creates tension. Decisions optimized for immediate reward often undermine long-term resilience. This is not merely a technical problem. It is a cultural one. Incentive structures reward speed over depth, reaction over reflection. In such an environment, patience becomes a competitive disadvantage, even though it is essential for sustainable growth. The irony is that markets punish the very behavior that ultimately keeps them healthy. Closely tied to this is the concept of leverage. Leverage magnifies outcomes, both positive and negative. In moderate amounts, it can enhance efficiency. In excess, it becomes destructive. What makes leverage particularly dangerous is that its risks remain invisible during periods of growth. Stability masks fragility. Success disguises vulnerability. Financial systems often collapse not because of a single bad decision, but because many reasonable decisions align in the same direction. When everyone believes the same thing at the same time, diversity of thought disappears, and with it, the system's ability to absorb shocks. Liquidity is another illusion worth examining. Markets appear liquid until they are not. In moments of stress, liquidity vanishes precisely when it is most needed. This is because liquidity is not a physical resource. It is a shared belief. When confidence erodes, buyers disappear, and prices fall not because value has changed, but because trust has. This is why crises feel sudden, even though they are years in the making. Let us also consider the role of innovation in finance. Financial innovation is often celebrated as progress, but not all innovation improves outcomes. Some innovations merely repackage risk in more complex forms, making it harder to see and easier to ignore. Complexity does not eliminate danger. It conceals it. True innovation should increase transparency, align incentives, and improve resilience. When it does the opposite, it becomes a source of systemic instability. Another overlooked factor is inequality. Markets tend to reward those who already possess capital, information, and access. Over time, this concentration of advantage can distort both economic and political systems. When large segments of society feel excluded from opportunity, trust erodes. And without trust, markets lose legitimacy. Financial stability cannot be separated from social stability. A system that produces extreme outcomes, even if technically efficient, will eventually face resistance, regulation, or collapse. Globalization has added yet another layer of complexity. Capital moves faster than regulation, faster than politics, and faster than public understanding. Shocks in one region transmit instantly to others. This interconnectedness increases efficiency, but it also increases vulnerability. Local mistakes become global problems. In such a world, national solutions are insufficient. Coordination matters. Transparency matters. Shared standards matter. There is also a moral dimension to markets that is often dismissed as irrelevant. Yet markets are human creations. They reflect our values, our priorities, and our blind spots. Pretending that markets are morally neutral absolves participants of responsibility, but it does not eliminate consequences. Ethical considerations are not external constraints. They are internal stabilizers. Education plays a crucial role here. Financial literacy is not about teaching people how to trade. It is about teaching them how to think probabilistically, how to understand uncertainty, and how to recognize manipulation. A well-informed public is less vulnerable to bubbles, panic, and exploitation. Finally, we must confront uncertainty itself. Modern finance often treats uncertainty as something to be quantified, hedged, or engineered away. But some uncertainty is irreducible. It cannot be modeled. It must be respected. The most dangerous moments in markets arise when uncertainty is mistaken for risk, and risk is assumed to be fully understood. A healthy financial mindset accepts uncertainty as permanent. It builds flexibility instead of rigid predictions. It favors adaptability over precision. As participants, observers, and beneficiaries of financial markets, we face a choice. We can chase certainty, speed, and short-term gain, or we can cultivate awareness, restraint, and responsibility. The first path is louder and more tempting. The second is quieter, but far more enduring. And with that understanding, I will end with this final sentence. Markets will always reflect who we are, and the future of finance depends on whether we choose insight over illusion. There is also an important distinction to be made between price and value, a distinction that markets frequently blur. Price is immediate, visible, and reactive. Value is slower, quieter, and often invisible. When markets function well, price moves toward value over time. When they malfunction, price becomes a substitute for value rather than a reflection of it. This confusion intensifies during periods of rapid growth. Rising prices create the impression of increasing value, even when underlying fundamentals remain unchanged or deteriorate. This is not deception in the traditional sense. It is collective self-persuasion. People believe because others believe, and soon belief itself becomes the justification. In such moments, skepticism is not welcomed. It is seen as pessimism, or worse, ignorance. Yet skepticism is the immune system of markets. Without it, excess spreads unchecked. Another critical element is information asymmetry. Markets are often described as information processes, but not all participants receive or interpret information equally. Access, speed, and framing matter. Those closer to the source of information gain an advantage, while others react to echoes rather than signals. This imbalance does not simply create winners and losers. It shapes behavior. When participants feel structurally disadvantaged, they take greater risks to compensate. This amplifies volatility and increases the likelihood of extreme outcomes. Technology has accelerated this dynamic. Algorithms trade faster than human thought. Automated systems respond to patterns without context. Speed has become a virtue in itself. Yet speed without understanding magnifies error. When many systems are programmed with similar assumptions, they fail together. Efficiency, in this sense, becomes fragility. We must also reflect on the role of central banks. Their actions are often portrayed as technical adjustments, but they carry immense psychological weight. Interest rates, liquidity injections, and policy statements influence not only borrowing costs, but confidence, expectations, and narratives. When markets begin to rely excessively on central bank intervention, a subtle dependency forms. Risk-taking increases under the assumption of rescue. Discipline erodes. Over time, this dynamic weakens the very stability these institutions aim to protect. There is no painless solution to this dilemma. Support withdrawn too early causes shock. Support maintained too long breeds distortion. Navigating this requires judgment, communication, and an acceptance that not all outcomes can be controlled. Another topic rarely addressed honestly is failure. Modern finance celebrates success stories while quietly discarding failures as anomalies. But failure is not an exception. It is a feature. Systems that do not allow failure accumulate hidden stress. Losses postponed are not losses avoided. They are losses multiplied. A resilient market is one that allows small failures to occur regularly, preventing catastrophic ones later. This principle applies to institutions, strategies, and even individual careers. Let us turn briefly to emerging markets. These environments reveal market dynamics in their most exposed form. Capital flows arrive quickly and depart even faster. Optimism shifts to panic with little warning. The consequences are felt not only in markets, but in everyday life. This volatility highlights a core truth: financial markets are not abstract arenas. They are deeply embedded in social and political realities. Currency swings affect food prices. Credit availability shapes employment. Market confidence influences governance. Ignoring this connection leads to policies that stabilize numbers while destabilizing lives. We should also examine the concept of growth itself. Growth is often treated as an unquestionable good. Yet the quality of growth matters more than its speed. Growth fueled by debt, speculation, or environmental depletion carries hidden costs. When those costs surface, they arrive with interest. Sustainable growth requires alignment between financial incentives and real economic contribution. When finance becomes detached from production, innovation, and human well-being, it begins to feed on itself. At the individual level, this raises important questions about motivation. Why do people participate in markets? For security, opportunity, status, or control? These motivations influence behavior more than models ever could. Understanding markets, therefore, requires understanding human desire. Fear of missing out drives bubbles. Fear of loss deepens crashes. Rationality operates within emotional boundaries, not above them. This is why adaptability matters more than prediction. The future will not unfold according to our models. It will unfold according to how systems react under pressure. Flexibility allows survival. Rigidity invites collapse. As we look ahead, uncertainty is not diminishing. It is increasing. Climate risk, demographic shifts, technological disruption, and geopolitical tension all intersect with financial systems. These forces cannot be neatly priced. They resist simplification. The task before us is not to eliminate uncertainty, but to design markets that can live with it. This requires modesty in ambition, clarity in purpose, and honesty in assessment. It requires acknowledging limits, both intellectual and structural. And sir, as this reflection draws toward its conclusion, I return to a simple but demanding idea: financial markets are mirrors. They reflect our assumptions, our incentives, and our collective blind spots. Changing the reflection requires changing what stands before it. There is one more layer of market behavior that often escapes formal discussion, and that is memory. Markets remember selectively. They recall recent pain vividly, while distant crises fade into abstraction. This selective memory distorts judgment. Safeguards built after past failures are gradually weakened, not because they were ineffective, but because they become inconvenient during periods of optimism. As generations of participants change, so do the lessons they carry. Those who experienced collapse firsthand behave differently from those who only studied it. This generational amnesia ensures that cycles are not merely repeated, but reinvented with new language and new instruments. Another subtle force shaping markets is reputation. Confidence in institutions, currencies, and even entire economies rests heavily on perceived credibility. Once damaged, reputation is extraordinarily difficult to restore. Markets forgive errors more easily than they forgive inconsistency or denial. This is why communication matters. Not polished optimism, but honest acknowledgement of limits and risks. When leaders speak as if uncertainty does not exist, markets eventually expose the fiction. We should also consider how markets influence behavior outside finance. Corporate decision-making, employment practices, and innovation priorities are increasingly driven by market expectations rather than long-term vision. When stock price becomes the primary measure of success, strategy narrows. Investment horizons shrink. Creativity gives way to optimization. This is not an argument against markets, but against allowing them to dominate every dimension of decision-making. Resilience, whether in markets or institutions, is built through diversity. Diversity of strategy, of perspective, of time horizon. Systems dominated by a single approach appear efficient, but lack redundancy. When stress arrives, there is nothing to fall back on. Finally, there is the question of responsibility across time. Financial decisions made today shape conditions for those who are not present to consent. Future workers, future investors, future societies inherit the consequences. This temporal imbalance challenges traditional notions of accountability. A mature financial system recognizes this asymmetry and tempers short-term advantage with long-term stewardship. As participants in this system, we are not merely reacting to prices. We are contributing to patterns that extend beyond our immediate view. Awareness of this does not paralyze action. It refines it. And with that reflection added, the conversation reaches a fuller shape, reminding us once again that markets are not destinations, but processes unfolding in real time, shaped by choices, beliefs, and restraint. One final aspect worth examining is alignment. Financial systems function best when incentives are aligned across participants. When rewards and consequences drift apart, distortions emerge. If gains are private while losses are socialized, risk-taking escalates beyond what the system can safely absorb. This imbalance does not announce itself immediately. It grows quietly, embedded in structures and expectations. Alignment also applies to knowledge. Decision-makers often operate with abstract indicators, while consequences unfold in concrete realities. When feedback is delayed or filtered, correction becomes harder. Markets then respond not to outcomes, but to interpretations of outcomes, adding yet another layer between action and consequence. There is also the matter of scale. Strategies that work at a small scale often fail when expanded. Liquidity, influence, and visibility change behavior. What once exploited inefficiency begins to create it. This is a paradox markets encounter repeatedly. Success alters the conditions that made success possible. Recognizing when scale transforms advantage into vulnerability is among the most difficult judgments in finance. Let us also reflect on patience, not as passivity, but as discipline. Patience allows observation. It creates space between impulse and action. In markets saturated with signals, the ability to wait becomes a competitive edge. Noise is abundant. Meaning is rare. Those who can distinguish between the two act less often, but more decisively. As uncertainty increases, narratives will compete more aggressively. Some will promise clarity, others will offer blame. The most dangerous narratives are those that simplify complexity into certainty. They feel reassuring, but they narrow perception. A healthy market culture tolerates ambiguity. It resists the urge for absolute explanations. Ultimately, finance is a language. It translates human expectation into numbers, contracts, and prices. Like all languages, it can clarify or obscure. Mastery lies not in fluency alone, but in understanding what remains unspoken. And as this added reflection settles into the larger conversation, it reinforces a quiet conclusion: markets do not demand brilliance as much as they demand awareness, restraint, and the courage to remain thoughtful when simplicity is most tempting. In closing, when we step back and observe financial markets in their full scope, what emerges is not a system governed purely by logic or mathematics, but a complex, evolving structure shaped by human belief, limitation, ambition, and restraint. Markets reflect how we think about risk, how we respond to uncertainty, and how we balance confidence with humility. They reveal our tendency to mistake momentum for meaning, price for value, and short-term success for long-term strength. Throughout this conversation, we have seen that stability is not the absence of volatility, but the presence of understanding, that resilience is built not through prediction, but through adaptability, and that responsibility in finance extends beyond individual gain to collective consequence. When incentives align with awareness, when innovation serves clarity rather than concealment, and when participation is guided by reflection rather than impulse, markets can fulfill their highest function, not merely allocating capital, but supporting a sustainable, open, and credible economic order. Ultimately, the future of finance will not be decided by faster systems or more complex models, but by the quality of judgment we bring to uncertainty, the discipline with which we question our assumptions, and the willingness to recognize that in markets, as in life, wisdom begins where absolute certainty ends.